In 1822, a book sold in London and Edinburgh described a country called Poyais. Good soil, clean water, a capital town on a riverbank. You could buy land there. You could buy its government bonds at 6% through an established London banking house. Over 200 people sailed in 4 ships. Every published count agrees that most of them never came back. The strangest part isn't the fake country. It's that the documents were genuine objects, even when the claims inside them were not. Gregor MacGregor was not an invented person. He was a Scottish soldier who fought in the Peninsular War, then sailed to Venezuela in 1812 and rose to general in the Wars of Independence. That part is real, and it is what made everything after it credible. In April 1820, on the Miskitu shore of what is now Honduras, MacGregor received a land grant from George Frederick Augustus, king of the Miskitu. Now hold 2 facts apart, because almost every telling of this story mashes them together. The document was real. A king with a long history of dealings with Britain put his mark on a grant, and MacGregor carried it back to London. What did not exist was the country later advertised in Britain. No capital called Poyais, no administration, no colony waiting for settlers. The shore itself was not empty. It had Miskitu authority, Carib and Poyais communities, and the remains of an earlier British settlement at Black River. What was missing was the state whose bonds would shortly be sold in London. And keep one more date in your pocket. In 1823, the same king revoked that grant. On the 1st of September, the Times printed his proclamation, and the ground it gave was the plain one, that MacGregor had not fulfilled his contract with him, agreeable to his stipulations. By then, the bonds were sold, and the ships had sailed. MacGregor reached London in 1821, styling himself the Cazique of Poyais, not king, Cazique, a word few Londoners could define. In 1822, a book appeared, more than 350 pages on the soil, climate, trade, and prospects of the Miskitu shore, published under the name Captain Thomas Strangeways. No such captain has ever been traced. Historians attribute the book to MacGregor or to someone working for him. The book makes plenty of loud promises about climate and prosperity and returns. But its most effective work is quiet. Much of it is recognizable geography, rivers, crops, and place names. And then, in the middle of a paragraph giving the Black River's coordinates and how far up it a boat can get, comes this. About 40 miles from the sea, on its left bank, is situated the town of Poyais, the capital of the territory of this name. Not described, not oversold. 40 miles from the sea, on its left bank, in the same flat voice as the soundings and the latitude, as though you would be foolish to question it. Put one invented fact in a paragraph of verifiable ones, and the verifiable ones can appear to vouch for it. The book was a prospectus. Poyais needed settlers, and settlers needed to believe there was a town waiting for them. Here is where the story stops being about one man. In October 1822, a Poyais loan went to the London market for £200,000 at 6%. 2,000 bonds, sold at £80 cash for every £100 of face value. On the 22nd, MacGregor's agent hired a city broker named John Lowe as the loan's contractor. The next day, Sir John Perring subscribed it. Perring was a baronet, a member of Parliament, and a former Lord Mayor of London, and his banking house was Perring, Shaw, and Barber. Now follow where the paper actually went, because this is the part the popular version leaves out. 2/3 of it never reached the public at all. It went to MacGregor's own agent, taken as payment for chartering the ships and for £16,000 of supplies. The remaining third stayed with the contractor, who held it back and worked the price upward. A week after the floating, Poyais was trading on the floor of the London Stock Exchange, its prices printed beside the loans of European powers. Look at the outward form of all that. Nothing about it looks unusual. Every step used the machinery of a sovereign loan. Whether MacGregor held the authority that machinery implied is a different question, and it was contested at the time. The king would later maintain the loan had never been authorized in his name. And it was not a loan. The same year, Colombia raised £2 million on the same market, in a boom of Latin American lending that would end in the Panic of 1825. Poyais paper competed for the same investors, and doubt was not absent. In February 1823, John Murray's Quarterly Review tore the Strangeways book apart and called the project unrealizable, in print. The loan was placed by then, but buyers were still paying their installments, and ships were still sailing. So ask the question this episode exists to ask. A warning existed. A disputed grant existed. A bank, a broker, a guidebook, and a listing on the exchange all existed. How did they coexist without anyone being required to settle the matter before the paper moved? Because no shared rule required it. No compulsory gate made promoter, banker, broker, and buyer resolve a contested claim before it circulated. Reputation did that work instead, and reputation was a general with a grant and a book. Bonds are for investors. Poyais needed people. The Honduras packet left London in September 1822 with roughly 70 settlers. The Kennersley Castle left Leith on the 22nd of January 1823 with about 170 more by the count of a passenger aboard. 2 further ships followed. A colonial office list of the passengers and their trades survives, and the surviving counts still do not reconcile cleanly. The passenger list does not describe one social type: tradesmen and their families, farmers, a doctor, a banker who had accepted the post of manager of the Bank of Poyais. Many had sold what they owned and converted the proceeds into Poyais land certificates before they boarded. One of them was a sawyer from Edinburgh named James Hasty, who had agreed to have £30 of family passage taken out of his future wages so he could bring his wife and children. Before the ship sailed, MacGregor came aboard at Leith Roads and asked after their accommodation. Because theirs was the first ship from Scotland going direct to Poyais, he declared that all the women and children would travel free, waiving the charge Hasty had agreed to pay. In Hasty's own account, they gave him a salute of 6 guns and 3 cheers. When Hasty came home, he wrote down what he had seen. They landed at the Black River on the 22nd of March, 1823. In Hasty's own words, "We were very much disappointed to find no town, houses, nor people, except a part of the former settlers, some of them still in tents, and some in houses or huts made of bamboo." Read that carefully, because it is more precise than the version usually quoted. No town. Not a rough town, not an unfinished town. None. But not an empty shore either. What they found was the earlier group from the Honduras packet, living in tents and in huts of bamboo thatched with reeds, and their governor absent, gone up the coast to chase the captain who had sailed off with the settlement's rum, coffee, and medicine chest, and was selling them as his own property. They did what people do. The weather was good and they were healthy, so they cleared ground and built huts. Hasty built his beside a hollow mahogany tree. They dug a cellar and put up a storehouse. Then the rainy season came, and with it the fever. Here is where the popular version goes loose, and where Hasty's own bookkeeping is more precise. By his count, the deaths during the whole stay at the settlement were 3 children, one of them his own, 5 men, and 1 man who shot himself. 9 people at the settlement itself in the period he records. Near the middle of May, a schooner came from Belize, and the chief magistrate there came ashore and told them that since they had never been paid their wages, they were free men. Several days after that, the king himself arrived with the men he called his counselors. He told them he had revoked MacGregor's grant, and that they could swear allegiance to him or leave the country. The ruler, whose document underpinned the whole promotion, was repudiating it to the settlers' faces. They were evacuated in a series of trips, and it was in the hospital at Belize that the dying began in earnest. Hastie describes people carried weekly to their graves. Among the first to die there was another of his children. More died on the voyage home. So be exact about what Hastie settles and what he does not. His account does not support placing the commonly repeated expedition-wide total at the settlement, and it does not tell us where every later death occurred. What the official inquiry does carry is the shipping. About 70 on the Honduras packet, about 170 on the Kennersley Castle, and a third ship, the Skeene, which reached Black River that August with 105 more, found no settlement and no trace of the people who had gone before, and whose passengers refused to land at all. Sickness had taken hold before the evacuation, and the evacuation then carried weakened people into crowded hospitals. And here we owe you the part of Hastie that does not flatter this episode's argument. He did not blame MacGregor. He says so directly. Of the misfortunes that befell them, so far as he could judge, MacGregor was not blamable. He blamed the men placed in charge. 5 other survivors swore the same thing under oath in London that October. That is their verdict, not ours. He still sold passages to families for a town that had never been built. But a witness you use for the numbers is a witness whose conclusion you have to show. Otherwise, you are not reading the document. You are shopping in it. MacGregor left Britain for Paris in the autumn of 1823, before the survivors got back. He did not stop. In August 1825, a second Poyais loan of £300,000 was advertised in France as the London market slid into the panic of 1825. The paper, meanwhile, had collapsed. Sold at £80, trading as high as £86 by the end of October 1822. Then the dispatches from Honduras reached London, and through the summer of 1823, it changed hands between £5 and 20. In January 1824, it was quoted one last time, and then dropped from the list altogether. The people who sailed lost more. In the summer of 1825, he hired a Paris colonial company to send settlers to the land he still believed was his. His London reputation caught up with him. Suspecting fraud, the Paris police held him for months while they investigated. The following year, he was declared innocent. Then in 1838, after his wife died, he sailed to Venezuela and gave up Poyais for good. He petitioned the government there as an old soldier of the Revolution and was granted a pension. In 1839, in Caracas, he had the petition printed with the government's answer bound in behind it. He died there in 1845. Modern scholarship has taken another look at him. The historian Damien Clavel has reconstructed Poyais as a more complicated venture, caught between indigenous political authority, British capital, and MacGregor's own ambitions. This file does not adopt that wholesale, but its underlying point survives, because the story was never really about one man's soul. It is about how a piece of paper from a king on one continent became a 6% bond on another, without one shared gate requiring the chain to settle the claim underneath. Be clear about what the surviving record does not prove. It does not prove MacGregor invented every part of this alone, or that every banker and agent in the chain knew what the settlers had been promised, or exactly where each person counted in the later estimates died. Here is what it does prove. A book named a capital that a settler could not find. A bond circulated through the machinery used for sovereign debt. A baronet's banking house subscribed the loan, and ships kept sailing after a published review had called the project unrealizable. And a sawyer from Edinburgh lost 2 of his children finding out. My reading is that the fraud was not the invented country. It was that a document saying it granted no sovereignty was used to sell sovereign debt, and nobody in the chain had to read it. The files are open. The question is, which institution was supposed to check? Which document should have stopped this chain first? The book, the grant, the prospectus, or the review? Put it in the comments and say why. If you would rather read the document than the folklore, subscribe. That is the whole channel.